Nigel Farage is very close mates with Donald Trump, and Reform's conference over the weekend proved once again he would bring the worst parts of Trumpism to Britain.
Well, one of Britain's most eminent oncologists, Professor Angley, said to me to share with you today that he thinks it's highly likely that the COVID vaccines have been a significant factor in the cancer of members of the royal family.
That's a really weird claim. The cancers of the royal family were caused by the COVID vaccine. Now, I should say the supposedly eminent oncologist referenced there by Malhotra just so happens to have stood to be a UKIP MP in 2015. Cancer UK was forced to respond to Malhotra's claim. So they said, there is no good evidence of a link between the COVID-19 vaccine and cancer risk. The vaccine is a safe and effective way to protect against the infection and prevent serious symptoms. Asim Malhotra is a senior advisor to Robert Kennedy Jr., so RFK Jr., who is the vaccine skeptic Trump put in charge of the US Health Agency. Farage is said to have personally secured Malhotra's speaking spot at the Reform Conference because of his closeness to Donald Trump. So we've had MAGA-style anti-vaxxers. But what else was on display at the Reform Conference? Well, Telegraph journalists Alison Pearson and Liam Halligan did a live version of their podcast, Planet Normal, and this was their special guest.
Our Planet Normal guest this week has become a living symbol of two-tier Britain. The sheer injustice she has suffered has shocked millions of people across Britain and indeed across the whole world. She's a wonderful mum, wife, beloved childminder, little kids from every corner of the earth she's taken wonderful care of. So I am, of course, referring to Britain's favourite political prisoner. Ladies and gentlemen, please give the warmest of welcomes
to Lucy Connolly.
Now, Lucy Connolly has recently been released from prison after a year inside for sending a tweet, which in the run-up to last year's summer riot. So this was the tweet, obviously after the horrible killing of 3 young girls. So she said, mass deportation now, set fire to all the effing hotels full of the bastards for all I care. While you're at it, take the treacherous government and politicians with them. I feel physically sick knowing what these families will now have to endure. If that makes me racist, so be it. So that was sent sort of just before those riots where asylum hotels were set on fire. She deleted that tweet after about 4 hours, I think. I personally think Lucy Connolly's sentence was out of proportion for her crime, which was to post this disgusting tweet and then delete it 4 hours later. But Ash, whatever your views on that, it does seem worrying to me that the party conference of the party leading in the polls is treating the person who wrote that tweet, set fire to all the effing hotels full of the bastards, is now being treated as a hero. He's getting a sort of hero's welcome, round of applause, like a rock star at Reform's conference.
Well, I just think there are so many parallels that you can draw between the Trump MAGA movement and what Reform is doing. And I also think that perhaps the ineffectiveness of the Democrats' attacks on Trump also give you a little bit of an indication of what works and what doesn't work in terms of being able to effectively combat it. So when it comes to Lucy Connolly, I agree it was a harsh sentence, but the core problem is that she entered a guilty plea for the most serious offence. Now, when you're putting that against a backdrop of widespread violent disorder, the sentence is going to be really, really harsh. Now, I don't, agree with the idea of the police, routinely intervening in people's social media posts. But taking that context and the guilty plea into account, yes, it was a harsh sentence, and I think an unduly harsh sentence. But I don't think that she is herself a victim of a miscarriage of justice. I mean, I think she made some very, very poor choices, including how she chose to deal with what pleas that she entered. What's interesting to me about her as a person is that not just the asylum seekers tweet, but I've seen some other, shall we say, not nice tweets that she posted. Now, of course, I don't think that the police should be knocking down her door. The thing which I think is interesting is what happens when you effectively reward somebody for dysregulated behavior. So, for outlandish behavior, offensive behavior, nasty behavior, when you turn them into a kind of celebrity, I don't think that anything good comes of that, whether it's political or whether it's in terms of, the inner political culture of reform or an individual's psychology. I think it's a very, very bad thing to turn people with a history of dysregulated behavior into celebrities. But there is a sort of parallel here in terms of trying to find someone who has done something, shocking and horrible, right, and repulsive, and trying to turn them into a bit of a hero for your cause. I mean, this is obviously much, much more extreme. But Kyle Rittenhouse, who you might recall is, an American teenager, he was a teenager at the time, who shot and killed somebody at a BLM protest. Now, the court ended up accepting that he acted in self-defense. You can tell what I think about that in terms of the court's findings. But he then became something of a superstar for the American right. And the point was, I think, to revel in the obnoxiousness of it all. Like, here's somebody who, rightly or wrongly, took a life, and you're turning him into a celebrity off the back of that. I think part of the idea is to rile people up and to sort of project a sense of being impervious to conventional morality. And I think that that's a bit of what's going on here with Lucy Connolly. And I guess the last thing that I'd end on is how effective is it to highlight this? You might remember in 2016, Hillary Clinton calling MAGA supporters a basket of deplorables. And spoiler alert, didn't result in her winning the presidential election. I think that it is a highly limited strategy to point out that a right-wing populist party is, full of Fruit Loops and people that you wouldn't want to hang out with, when there isn't a credible populist alternative. So when you've got someone who is effectively the voice of the establishment, the voice of business as usual, saying, let's condemn these people, the fact is that I think many voters out there feel so let down by the current state of affairs that they can choose not to mind. They can choose not to mind who they're sharing a ballot box with. And so I think that there are some lessons for everybody there.
And Carl Rittenhouse actually killed 2 people. And that was, what was so disgusting about that is whether or not you think it was in self-defense. From looking at the evidence, I don't think it was. But obviously a jury found it was. So, maybe they looked at the more details than me. But he went to a protest with a big gun. It's not a heroic thing to do. Whether or not you think he should have been guilty or not guilty, that's not a heroic thing to do. So treating him like a hero is incredibly dangerous. And I think it's exactly the same with...
I forgot it was more than one person. I mean, I think that's even more sickening. And yet, I think he drove across state lines, with a high-powered gun and killed 2 people. To turn someone who's killed 2 people into a celebrity for the act of killing 2 people, I think is disgusting.
Obviously, the right would say that the left have done it for Luigi Mangione.
Yeah, but he had great eyebrows.
On the point of where, is this a good thing to attack reform on because, it didn't work for Donald Trump? I mean, I think that can be overplayed because, one of the things that I think did bring him down in 2020 was sort of his incompetence during COVID-19. And obviously he has got into power by allying with RFK Jr. being the anti-vaxxer and stuff, but maybe that did depress his vote a little bit. I don't know. And I feel like it is a risky strategy for Nigel Farage to invite people to his conference who are going to say that the royals got cancer from the COVID vaccine. Like, I'm not saying that will no one can become prime minister while they're allowing people like that to be the voice of their party. But it does seem like if he was, really disciplined in his focus on getting to number 10, you probably would avoid that kind of thing if possible. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is important for motivating your base, but I don't know. What do you think?
Well, the thing is that by their nature, conferences are base facing. So it doesn't really have too much of an impact on voters, unless you've got, what happened during the Corbyn years, which is, the entirety of the lobby combing through for scare stories, which are going to run top of the Today program for a week afterwards. All right. That's maybe when it matters. But ultimately, conferences are base facing. They're not really for the general public. They're not really for the wider electorate. I think that you make an important point about the possible difference between Trump and Farage, which is Britain and America have different political cultures. So you have, a strain of gun-toting libertarianism, which in this country we don't really have. I think we're more comfortable with the idea of authority in this country. And while there were obviously anti-lockdown and some anti-vax protests, they didn't find a massive political expression. So there wasn't really, war around schools and stuff like that. The same way there were, huge battles over, mask mandates and mandatory vaccines in the States. So I think that the contexts are a bit different. But in terms of you saying, oh, well, maybe it depressed Trump's vote. I mean, just don't forget that in 2024, Trump made gains with basically everybody. So, could he have won, to quote the orange man himself, could he have won more bigly had he not aligned himself with vaccine skeptics? Maybe, but he won pretty big.
Yeah, he won pretty bigly. I suppose on Luigi Mangione, because obviously there were lots of people online were kind of fangirling him. And we obviously on this show commented on his attractiveness whilst not endorsing him having murdered someone. But you still can't imagine actually even like a kind of, say like if the Corbyn Sultana party launches, they would not have him on to speak at a conference. Actually, no, Lucy Connolly didn't kill anyone. The example here is the Americans. The Democrats would not have Louis Mangione on to speak, but the Republicans did have Kyle Rittenhouse on to speak. So there is only, I don't want to do the false equivalence where I say everyone's the same, because it is actually only the right.
I mean, I think that with Luigi Mangione, there is perhaps a shared spirit of trolling, to be honest. And I think that, you held a mirror up to my face, Michael, when you said, well, what about Luigi? And the only thing I could do was try and parry it away with a joke, which is the refuge of someone who knows they're on shaky ground. But I think that, to consider it, there is certainly an element of trolling when you think about the way in which Luigi Mangione in like online circles has been turned into a beloved figure. And I think that while there are differences when violence is also associated with racism and with misogyny and with anti-Semitism and all of these things, I do think that does make a moral difference. But I do think that there is this sense of wanting to hold, two fingers up to expected norms. So in a way, while I don't think of them as being moral equivalents, certainly in terms of, the harm that was done by a CEO of a health insurance company that routinely denied people life-saving healthcare. I think the harm that they did is very, very different from the harm that two protesters were alleged to have done. And so, the Kyle Rittenhouse and Luigi Mangione thing for me is not a moral comparison, or a moral equivalent, shall we say. I think that it's a fair comparison to think about, well, why is it that we have a political culture where individuals who do commit violent acts kind of become something of a meme. The difference is as you said, like Luigi Mangione would never be conveyor belted into respectability in the way that Kyle Rittenhouse was after his acquittal.
Yeah. I mean, the right have done a thing of saying this is normal politics. And while there are sections of the online left that say there should be normal politics, I don't think people should extrajudicially kill each other, basically. But yeah, I can see why people trolled when it came to Luigi. But no mainstream
Not in favour
party
of
did.
extrajudicial killings. Michael,
No.
you're so trad. So trad.